Iran has rejected a proposal and a proposed truce in its war with the US and Israel, despite a threat by US President Donald Trump to destroy its vital infrastructure. Trump's deadline ends in less than 24 hours, but Iran says that Trump's threats are baseless. President Trump is demanding that Tehran reopen the Strait of Hormuz by Tuesday 8 p.m. local time, that's Eastern time for the US, or face a newly devastating round of bombing. Listen to these excerpts from Trump.
The entire country can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night. We have a plan, because of the power of our military, where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to.
Iran dismissed the threats as baseless and said that they would not deter ongoing military operations. Iranian military spokesperson said that US President's rude rhetoric and arrogance stemmed from a deadlock and were intended to justify what he called repeated US military failures.
The rude rhetoric, arrogance and baseless threats of the delusional US president, arising from the deadlock he faces and aimed at justifying the repeated defeats of the US military, will have no effect on the continuation of offensive and crushing operations by the fighters of Islam against US and Israeli enemies, and will not repair the humiliation of the United States in West Asia. With the help of Almighty God, every action you take will add another defeat to your previous defeats.
Well, both Trump and Iran said, meanwhile, that a proposal touted by international mediators for a 45-day ceasefire is not yet ready. Trump had said earlier that the plan is a significant proposal, but he later went on to say it was not good enough. Iranian state media quoted officials as saying that Tehran too has rejected a ceasefire. Iranian state media said that in this response set out in 10 points, Iran has insisted on the need for a definitive end to the conflict. They don't want a temporary ceasefire. They want a permanent stop to the war. Tehran's demands include an end to conflicts in the region, a protocol for safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. They've made it clear that they are going to be charging an amount from every passing vessel. And the lifting of sanctions is also something they have demanded. The UN Security Council is set to vote on Tuesday on a watered-down resolution addressing Iran's threats to the Strait of Hormuz after more robust drafts earlier faced potential vetoes. Bahrain, backed by other oil-exporting Gulf countries, launched negotiations 2 weeks ago on a draft resolution that would have given a clear UN mandate to any state wishing to use force to unblock the strait. However, after objections from several veto-holding permanent members, including France, the latest draft does not expressly authorize force. Iran has imposed an effective blockade on the critical waterway since the United States and Israel launched the war on the 28th of February, sending ripple effects throughout the global economy, eventually also affecting US oil prices. Iran's virtual blockade of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil normally flows, has sent oil and gas prices soaring and pushed countries around the world to enact measures to contain this fallout. All right, for more on this, I'm now being joined live by Dr. Rohan Gunaratna. He is a professor of security studies at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Singapore. Professor, thank you so much for making time for us. As far as this deadline is concerned, do you feel this is going to be the final deadline? Because that's something that Trump is also very well aware of, given the number of times it has been extended. He said this is the final one. Will it be?
The US has moved a third of its aviation and naval assets to the region. US is also moving a third aircraft carrier to the region, and that will enable the United States to mount the type of operation that President Trump threatened Iran that he will do so. That is, there is George H.W. Bush will reach the US supercarrier and also USS Abraham Lincoln and Gerald Ford, they are all positioned for this operation. So looking at the US capabilities, they are able to conduct that type of operation. Of course, it will devastate Iran's economy, its infrastructure, its energy, oil, gas infrastructure, its petrochemical infrastructure, and it will take decades to build that. But what it is going to do is it's also going to create a new reality for the world, meaning there will be an inflation and there will be a lot of hardship that people will endure. So is that where the world wants to move into?
Dr. Gunaratna, coming back to the diminishment of Iranian abilities at this point, if you look at what's going on in the battlefield, it does not seem to be the case. Even yesterday, or while we even speak right now, less than half an hour ago, there were reports suggesting that while Israel is firing at Tehran, Iran is also firing right back, and this is happening in real time. Missiles, projectiles being directed all across the Gulf. That's happening on a daily basis. Kuwait, Saudi, Qatar, UAE, all reporting incoming projectiles. As far as US is concerned, of course, that fight directly with Iran, it continues. Is Iran out of the fight? Is there any reason why they should, at this point, succumb to this deadline?
Iran's capabilities are still very significant, as you mentioned. It has a very effective aerospace program for aerospace weapons, missiles, drones, and other projectiles. And it also has other weapons it may use in the future it has never used before, mostly in the chemical and the biological arena. So that is why it is so important for the response to Iran to be calibrated in terms of their mindset and capabilities. But certainly I can tell you, looking at the attack yesterday in Haifa, where 4 people were killed, 3 Israelis and 1 Filipino wife of an Israeli national. Israel has suffered a lot, but Israel is a very resilient state. It will be able to fight back. With regard to the Gulf, yes, the Gulf moment has faded away, meaning that their capabilities are now largely defensive, and safety and security Gulf offered to the world has diminished. So what is important is for there to be some reflection on all parties, and also for Iran to be told that Iran's capabilities cannot sustain over the long term. It is on the decline. It may become terminal as well. And that is why it is so important for Iran to, at this point, to open the Straits of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz doesn't belong to Iran at all. It is being controlled by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and they are doing that because they want revenue from the trade that is taking place. And that should end. In fact, there should be a UN resolution to open the Strait of Hormuz so that there is free navigation and free sea passage.
I hear your point, Professor. Strait of Hormuz, let's come to that point, because that's pretty much the center point of this entire war. That's the biggest leverage Iran has, regardless of all the hits that it is constantly taking. There's no denying that. But Strait of Hormuz from the White House was not even an objective just a week ago. Now it's a very big priority, quote unquote, from the US president. This is just hours ago in that press conference. US has clearly understood that they can't distance themselves from the Strait of Hormuz because their own oil prices are also going up. They are getting affected by it. Iran, over the course of these last 6 weeks, has realized the impact they have or can have across the world. A lot of voices in the US are in fact blaming the US for creating a problem that never existed before, because the Strait of Hormuz was clear before February 28th. Do you see it that way? Does US need to retreat first for the Strait of Hormuz to return to any state of normalcy?
The IRGC is currently dictating to the world by controlling the Straits of Hormuz. So as long as Iran, the Iranian regime does that, of course, the global crisis will move to a point of chaos. The Americans will not move out of their intention of clearing the Straits of Hormuz. All indicators, signs, and clues of the American existing deployment and the American assets that have been now moved to the region, both from the Far East and from the United States, clearly demonstrate that it is planning to intervene and control the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the IRGC has a huge leverage. It is not only 1/5 of the oil and gas, but it's also the pharmaceuticals, it is also the fertilizer and other petroleum products. So it's going to be a major fight, and we will know in the next 24 hours exactly what is going to happen.
I agree, Dr. Gunaratna, that you cannot rule out, regardless of how many times that deadline has been postponed, you cannot rule out the chance or the possibility of the US in fact carrying out hostilities or getting into a full-on conflict regarding the Strait of Hormuz, because now it's clear the US cannot exit without the Strait of Hormuz being opened. And even before this war actually started, and as you know, when we were reporting this, it was very clear that this was the largest armada forming around Iran. But the questions were still rising. Will the war actually start, or is this just an intimidation factor, but the war started? So if you just commensurately look at this situation, it also hints, there are hints now, that there can be hostilities which can only flare up further. But let me come back to the point of US assets in the region. More assets are being deployed. But look at the F-15s that have been damaged, the F-16, the F-18, the F-35, KC-135, E-3 Sentry, the THAAD, the radars. How much damage more can the US sustain also as far as their own armada around Iran is concerned? Because it all reflects that there was a gross miscalculation of how much Iran can fight. Do you see it that way?
You are exceptionally well read, and you are aware of what the setbacks the US has suffered in Iran. So that is why there's a lot of pressure on Trump not to move forward with a full-blown campaign. But at this point, all indicators are that the Americans will strike. The Israel that has built a combined force with the US military will also continue to strike. And of course, it's going to reach unprecedented level, but Iran will also fight back. Iran has certain capabilities. So I believe that in the next 24 hours, we will see a huge fight in Iran, unless Iran agrees through mediation for some kind of settlement, for some kind of resolution.
It seems, Dr. Gunaratna, that over the course of the last 6 weeks, because diplomacy was in place, negotiations were taking place, there were indirect talks taking place through Oman, but the war started in the midst of that, and that has resulted in a complete lack of trust from the Iranians. That is the narrative that they're carrying. And when you look at what has happened this year, and also how the 12-day war started in the midst of diplomacy, how the US walked out of the JCPOA, there is reason that Iran gives to how it is now viewing any chance of possible diplomacy. But let me look at US foreign policy while we're speaking. There were comments which came out from Donald Trump. He mentioned Japan, he mentioned Australia, he mentioned South Korea, and then he also mentioned all of NATO, saying that we didn't need all of y'all, none of y'all came to our help. The Gulf countries are already tying up with Ukraine when they have US air defenses deployed already. I've raised this question with a number of my guests. Do you feel that trust factor, forget Iran at this point, among US own allies has also gravely been diminished in these last 6 weeks?
US is the dominant superpower, but we have seen during this period, Russia, China has risen very significantly. Of course, US own allies, the Europeans, both continental Europe and UK, has distanced themselves away from Trump. And I believe that the world is changing very rapidly, and US will no longer be able to rely on its traditional allies in the Iran project or any other interventions in the future. With regard to Iran, Iran will not negotiate with President Trump after their leaders have been killed. Iran is a revolutionary state, and it will not enter into dialogue. In fact, they say very openly, we want revenge from Trump. We will retaliate. So Iran itself is very cautious now of dealing with Trump.